right, everybody, welcome back to the Den of Sin with Devin and James. This is a part 2. This is our first part 2 we've ever recorded. We are on the topic of 1974, and that just turned out to be too damn much movie to fit into an hour. James, have you been okay since we last taped?
Yeah, I've been busy with work and watching movies, so same old, same old.
I watched a few too. It actually gave me time to catch two of them that I definitely plan to bring up. One maybe a little more than the other.
I'm excited to hear it. Yeah, no, I wasn't able to watch any of the films specifically released in 1974 because there's a bunch of newer stuff I'd wanted to see. This movie called The Shed that's streaming exclusively on Shudder. Also, this movie, The Color Out of Space, which is done by the same director as two underappreciated horror classics, sci-fi horror classics is the first one, but Hardware and Dust Devil. But I don't know if you've seen it, Devin, but it's a H.P. Lovecraft adaptation. Some people are saying it's the best H.P. Lovecraft adaptation ever. So I got about 30 minutes into that movie before I fell asleep last night, as I've been wearing myself too thin recently. But it was good, and I liked what I saw, and it's Nicolas Cage. So I'm excited to finish that. But, I didn't specifically watch any. I didn't want to overwhelm myself with films of 1974. But, I'm excited to talk about a few of the ones I have already seen. So.
Yes, of course. And I did want to see The Color Out of Space. I'm a big Lovecraft fan, going way back when I was a kid. I read a lot of Lovecraft. I found it to be interesting casting because Lovecraft is kind of known for the unknown. He'll eloquently describe the room or the castle that whatever character is in, but then when it comes to the monster or whatever, yep. it's undescribable. It's so awful I can hardly bring the words together to describe it. And I think that's kind of how I would describe Nicolas Cage's career too. So
there you go.
And that's not an insult. I love Nicolas Cage.
No, of course I do too. I think he's one of the most. He's one of those guys that just continues to work and work and work, and he'll do. For every 3 good movies, he'll make 3 or 4 bad movies or 2 really bizarre movies. But when he is brilliant, he is brilliant. Movies like Port of Call New Orleans, Bad Lieutenant, Port of Call New Orleans, which is the longest title for a sequel ever. Mandy. He does brilliant roles, and every now and then. I don't know if you've ever seen Drive Angry, but that's another movie that shouldn't have been even remotely watchable. But he's so Nick Cage in it that he makes it work. So
I agree. I like that.
Now, just real quick while we're on the topic of H.P. Lovecraft, because Ben knows a lot recently. We won't touch upon his personal politics because that's well discussed. But have you watched or have you heard anything about the HBO series based off the novel Lovecraft Country?
I know a bit about it. I haven't had a chance to watch it yet. It's on my to-do list.
I've watched every episode so far. First episode was just amazing. Second episode was good. The newest episode, though, is just sort of, I don't know, it feels like it's disconnected from the beginning part of the season. It's great. The cast is great. Journey Smollett is one of my big crushes, so I enjoy it for that reason. But it doesn't feel very much like, it doesn't actually feel like Lovecraft. That's a point of contention, but it's not trying to be a direct adaptation. It's more using the weird fiction and that kind of element that obviously it's playing, just speaking frankly, it's playing off a little bit of Lovecraft's notorious racism that he expressed early in his career, some ugly racism. Now, it is said that he sort of did kind of see the light a little bit towards the end of his life, but regardless, the writer took somebody who's sort of has a notorious racist streak and populated it with black voices and people of color. And it's interesting. The show itself is good. It doesn't feel, like I said, it doesn't actually feel like a Lovecraft work. He is, in fact, it's in the series, Lovecraft is a known writer, and in this story, sort of presupposing that Lovecraft based a lot of his stuff on reality or things that actually were happening. You have to see it, but it is good. I just don't know if it's very faithful. It doesn't really feel, especially in the newest episodes, it's like a haunted house episode. But anyways, it's weird little side tangent. I will say my favorite H.P. Lovecraft story, Lovecraft adaptation so far, has been Dagon from, I think, 1990, 1991.
Yeah, I remember that. That was a Full Moon, wasn't it? Full Moon Entertainment?
Full Moon released it, yeah. I think it's actually, is it Brian Yunza directed it, I think? I could be wrong. But either way, it's really good. Yeah, it's based off of Innsmouth. Anyways, we'll save H.P. Lovecraft adaptations for another day. But
we'll
let's
do
get into
Gothic
it.
horror at some point. Yeah, let's get
There
into
you
it.
go.
I did have a particular place I wanted to start on this one. Martin Scorsese's Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore.
Yes.
Which won Ellen Burstyn a well-deserved Oscar in a really intense competition that included some of the greatest performances of all time.
Yes, I 100% agree with that.
So I'm assuming then that you've seen Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah. Great performances all around. For people who are fans of Scorsese, definitely, if you're used to even stuff like Mean Streets and other Scorsese movies, this is very much off that path. Chris Christopherson's great in it. Ellen Burstyn is obviously phenomenal in it. It's very sad. Yeah. I mean, it's a great movie. I mean, at this point, I feel like if you say it's a Scorsese movie, it's sort of a given that it's going to be, especially early Scorsese. I don't think Scorsese ever actually made a bad movie. He's made some movies that aren't as, like the Kundun, and there's movies he's made that maybe aren't as popular or as beloved.
Stuff that doesn't score very high on the rewatchability. Like Kundun's fantastic, but I have not felt the need to see it since I saw it in the theater. And Scorsese's my favorite filmmaker. There's a part of me that's almost embarrassed to say Scorsese's my favorite filmmaker, and I think the only reason being it has nothing to do with the man himself. It's just kind of this weird feeling of well, that's everybody's favorite filmmaker. I wish that my favorite filmmaker was maybe somebody off the beaten path a little bit more. It's such a film school response. Martin Scorsese, but the bottom line is the guy knows how to make a movie, and he proves it with this by taking himself out of the mean streets, so to speak, and taking himself to Arizona, where the weather agreed with his asthma much better. And he really lobbied to get this. It was kind of Ellen Burstyn's choice. I don't believe she's credited as a producer, but she essentially did the work of a producer and really rightfully should have taken credit as a producer. She had her choice of anybody that could direct this movie. And when she talked to Scorsese and said, why do you want to make this? This isn't your kind of movie. It's a movie about women. She asked him point blank, what do you know about women that would qualify you to make this? And he said, nothing, but I'm willing to learn. And she said that was what convinced her that he was the right person to kind of take this on and kind of be not pliable, but willing to be sensitive to maybe not knowing what the source material was about and creating a greater understanding by creating the art itself, which is something that you don't hear about a lot these days.
Yeah, it's funny. I've never heard that story, but that's the one thing about the 70s, man, is those kind of things where people willing to do make art or take chances and tell different kind of stories, and everything wasn't fueled by, money as much. I mean, obviously the films have always been a giant commercial avenue, but I mean, the thing is, I totally feel what you mean about Scorsese. It's almost obvious that he's your, Scorsese is my favorite director, but he should be your favorite director. I mean, if you're legitimately a film fan, that guy's track record, how would you not, especially even if you took just a handful of his movies, this being one of them, if you just took a few, just randomly chose movies, he'd still be, even if he only made half of the films he's made, he'd still be one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. And again, the one thing that I love about Scorsese is you could tell he loves, that's the one thing I feel is missing from a lot of real, there's all sorts of filmmakers I love, and a lot of great filmmakers, whether they're the Italian filmmakers, the French New Wave directors, people like Coppola, there's all these different kinds of filmmakers, but I feel like to be a brilliant filmmaker, you have to actually love people. You have to be fascinated with people, and you have to genuinely kind of, while recognizing that humanity has awful aspects, I think you have to really celebrate the human condition. Really pessimistic filmmakers, obviously Kubrick would be one that stands out, can still make great, beautiful films, but there's a coldness and a detachedness there that it doesn't hit you in the same way that, that's the thing. That's why I think Scorsese's been brilliant, is he's even, and I think it's much harder to do than I think people realize, is it making despicable people or people who do despicable things likable and relatable characters, and he's done that his whole career. And it's because he understands that even people who have made bad mistakes and who maybe even honestly be bad people, there's still a humanity there that needs to be explored, or that can be mined for story. And I think he's, obviously his track record speaks for itself, but to bring it back specifically to this movie, he's an actor's director, and I think that's why he's been so successful, is he really lets the actors do what they need to do. And this is a very, like I said, it's a much more quiet movie. It's about people, it's about relationship between people, and it's just, it's great. I mean, it's what do you say? It's definitely in my top 10. It's which is insane to say my top 10 Scorsese movies, but when you look at the breadth of his movies, it's understandable. But yeah, I would say even in my top 5 Scorsese. It's just, and I like, and you and I, you're the first person I ever met besides my mother who loved Chris Christopherson. So. I think like that's the thing too. Like he's so underappreciated as an actor and as a musician too. But in this movie, he's brilliant in this too. That's why obviously Ellen Burstyn is amazing. She won the Academy Award, but I also, like I said, he's so good in this crazy. So
well, I've actually got a story before we move on to the next thing. I don't want to turn this into the Alice podcast, but you mentioned a couple of things that brought up this story in my head. For anyone that doesn't know, Alice doesn't live here anymore. Just the quick rundown. It was the inspiration for the sitcom Alice from the late 70s about waitresses at Mel's Diner. And this is the story of how Alice gets to Mel's Diner. She actually, in this, has aspirations to become a singer. So their waitressing job, just like so many other people, it's just a stopover day job on her way to hopeful fame and fortune, or at least earning a living doing what she loves to do, which is something any artist can kind of relate to. And for Alice doesn't live here anymore, Chris Christopherson's cast as the love interest for the second half of the movie, because the part of the story is her going through a few different relationships that really do not end well. And so Christopherson's trying to prove that he's different, but he's kind of proving that he's different by doing more and more of the same. And he's just not really the right person for her. And that was originally supposed to be the ending. She was supposed to be left, in Mel's Diner. All the men in her life have let her down and whatever. And when they were rehearsing it, Christopherson couldn't get their argument down. They argue in the diner in front of everybody, their breakup scene. He couldn't nail down the ending of that scene. And finally, in an improvisation, he just says, "Fine, fuck it, Alice, let's go. I'm going to follow your dream. We're going to go to Monterey and you're going to be a singer and I'm in for it." Something along those lines.
Yeah.
And Scorsese said, "You know what? If that's the way you're going to nail the scene, then go out there and nail the scene." And it completely changed the ending of the movie, where Chris Christopherson, rather than be another selfish dick, decides that he's going to put his dreams on hold in order to support hers because he wants her in his life, which ultimately is an incredibly strong statement about relationships in general and how a man can follow a woman's dreams. And that was, as far as I know, that may not have even been depicted in any movie since, but that's how it's kind of left, is that she's going to go.
I will actually, no, I believe it has been depicted in one of my favorite movies, Say Anything. Very much similar. Right.
It's been forever since I've seen that.
No worries. I mean, I got to give Lloyd Dobler his props. One of the most likable romantic comedy leads ever. But yeah, no, I mean, exactly. And it's funny though, because even watching it to this day, like there's still a sense of like, maybe I'm a pessimist, but I still get the sense that relationship is going to work out. He's conceding in a way that's like, I don't know. There's a sense of pessimism to me when I watch it. I feel like he's throwing his hands up not because he really wants to support her, but because he doesn't want to lose her, and like
he's momentarily giving her the argument as well, which you can support by saying, "Hey, that character's not in the sitcom."
That's right. Exactly. That's true.
And she's still in Mel's Diner.
Exactly.
So you're probably right, but the romantic in me.
Exactly. When you watch it, you get, because you get the feeling it's going to not the way the script is laid out. You get the feeling, you can see where it's going from the original idea for the ending, which is he's just not going to work out. But yeah, I mean, it is very sweet. But I do some reason every time I watch it, I'm like, I don't think this is going to last.
You're probably right. But let's move on. Is there anything you wanted to start off with?
I mean, there's tons of movies, a lot of smaller movies. I mean, one I just have to get right off the chest is Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla.
If you didn't bring it up, I was going to, purely for you.
Yeah, I have to talk about it. I mean, just a fun. I mean, the Showa era, basically from the 50s all the way into Godzilla 1984. That's the era of Godzilla I love, when it's very. I mean, I love all Godzilla, but when he's extra campy and silly, it's really where my heart is. But, it introduces these, aliens, and, you have Mechagodzilla, which I still think is one of the coolest. I love Mechagodzilla, the design, especially the original design. Yeah, it's a fun, silly movie. It's the first time you see Mechagodzilla would go on to be in many more sequels feels because he became a fan favorite. I mean, if you like Godzilla movies, how do you not like Godzilla fighting a robot disguised as Godzilla, who's being bad, and then Godzilla reveals that he's actually a mecha Godzilla underneath, and there's these goofy Planet of the Apes looking aliens who it's a goofy movie, but I love it. But I have to talk about that. But I do want one of the ones I do want to talk about.
Wait, hold
there's
on,
a lot I want to talk about.
There's a few.
Oh, yeah.
Real quick, I don't mean to interrupt, but just because Godzilla is kind of the perfect spot, and I don't intend to go into detail on these, but there were a couple of series from the 60s and the 70s that did have movies that came out this year. And just to kind of list them off here, Godzilla, obviously out of Japan. Coffin Joe, who's kind of the Brazilian Freddy Krueger, had Black Exorcism come out. And there was The Golden Voyage of Sinbad. There was a Lone Wolf and Cub movie called White Heaven and Hell. And Santo and Blue Demon versus Dr. Frankenstein. So a lot of these classic old, especially I'm talking here particularly foreign sequels. And the Street Fighter series came out this year as well.
Son of Street Fighter. Was it Son of Street Fighter in this year?
IMDb has all of them from 1974. So I don't know when they were shot, but they must have all been released domestically, or they must have all been released in the United States in 1974. Because even Sister Street Fighter is credited.
I think it was the Return of Street. Is it really?
Yeah.
I'd have to look that up.
I'm sure that there's something going wrong with their information, but IMDb has all of the Street Fighter
Every of
movies.
them listed in 74?
And at least the first Sister Street Fighter.
You know what? It might have been originally released in Japan previous, and then maybe it's its American release, maybe?
It could be.
But either way, I mean,
we have to mention Son of Shiva.
Exactly. You got it. I could not agree more. In fact, there's like a lot of, there's a few. Lady Snowblood 2 came out this year. There's a lot of like foreign films that we'll get to it, but there's a lot. Yeah. Again, 1974, there's a lot to cover here, but yeah, I'm glad. In fact, I didn't even see the Coffin Joe come up on when I was doing some research of films that came out that year, but we could do a whole episode about and that gentleman actually just passed away this year, I believe.
Yeah, I heard about that. And
but we could
the boogeyman of all of Brazil.
That's right. Yeah, and for many films, like he did quite a few movies, and
Brazilian parents, that used to tell their kids, if you don't clean your room, Coffin Joe's going to get you.
That's right. He's kind of become a little bit more well-known here with certain circles in the last few years, but for the longest time, he wasn't well-known here. I only found out about him probably 10 years ago, and then, again, very iconic-looking character. The movies are so much fun and over the top. But yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that would have went right past me. One other movie that I'll talk about just very briefly is, I don't even know. I never know how to say this word, but Poliziotteschi, basically the Italian like mafia crime, police kind of genre, basically like their own subgenre of crime films. Because everybody knows Giallo, but Poliziotteschi, butchering that.
It was police films from Italy that usually had like Franco Nero was a huge star in those, and
exactly. In fact, he's the star of Street Law, and I think what's that?
Thomas Milan was another one.
That's right. That's right. I think of all of those films, I do actually think Street Law is my favorite. I think Franco Nero's amazing in it. I just like the story. Like, he's just like a guy who gets robbed and gets beat up, and he just goes to, basically, which is very popular in the 70s, goes to take justice into his own hands. That kind of story will make a return in this podcast, that genre film, but I felt like it needed to be mentioned. I think it's, of all the Italian crime movies of the 70s and early 80s, it's my favorite. Yeah.
And for anybody that's looking for a contemporary link to that, these are exactly the kind of movies that DiCaprio's character was going out to Italy to film in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
That's right. Exactly. That's right. Good call out.
Okay. Well, you brought up vigilanteism, so maybe that's the leap off point. I'll let you take this one away, because I've heard you speak about this one on other podcasts before quite eloquently. It's not a film that you hear people speak eloquently about very often.
No, in fact, so we're talking about the classic action film, the original Death Wish with Charles Bronson, based off a novel of the same name, which the novel was very much, that's what I think is very interesting, is especially a time when you had films you had a lot of films in the early 70s and mid 70s that were being political, but, in a sort of, uncovering the ills of society and the ills of the Vietnam War. The filmmakers of Death Wish went the other way, because the book is much more about how taking law in your own hands is a bad thing. It's about the emptiness of vengeance and the dead end road that can go down. Well, the fucking filmmaker said, no, that's boring. Let's glorify vigilantism in the most delicious, entertaining way possible. Charles Bronson plays Paul Kersey, one of the most long-running. He's not necessarily James Bond era level, but
it's
one
on the
of
level
the
of
most
like a Dirty Harry. You know, it's
I think there's actually, if I'm not mistaken, because
there's 5 of each of those.
Yeah, there is 5. That's right. I was like, there is 5. I always forget Deadpool. Maybe my brain's trying to remind me.
Deadpool's not the worst one. I think Sudden Impact and The Enforcer are the ones that bore me the most in the Dirty Harry series. But that's another.
See,
I like them all. I like them all.
Yeah.
But nothing tops Dirty Harry, Magnum Force, and then Deadpool's just kind of fun. I mean, there's a car chase with a remote control car, for God's sake. It's silly.
That's true.
Jim Carrey playing basically Axl Rose.
Axl Rose, yeah.
It's dumb.
I saw that.
Much more entertaining.
I saw that movie in a theater in Reno, Nevada, in a basically like a room on a fucking boat, I guess. I don't know if it was a hotel or if it was one of the boats, but it wasn't even like a movie theater. It literally had folding chairs and they were just projecting it on the wall. We paid like $14. It's something crazy. No, I think it was actually mad cheap. I think that was another thing we did in Reno. I think it was like super cheap. But either way, I saw it in the theater when I was probably too young to watch it, and I was like, I don't know about this. But I also saw, on the same weekend, we saw Caddyshack 2. So what a weekend for movies.
Oh, that's a winner, yeah.
But yeah, so anyways, Paul Kersey basically, it was very notorious at the time, and its sequels even far more so.
This is back to Death Wish.
Yes, we're back to Death Wish now, listeners. My apologies for jumping everywhere. But yeah, so it was seen as being very lascivious and very exploitative, and there's a lot of like violence against women, or there's some graphic violence against women, and
trigger warning. It still is one of the most intense rape scenes I've ever seen in a movie.
Yes, although I do think part 2 is. I don't know, man. They're all kind of fun.
Yeah.
But yeah.
The lesson here is don't become friends with Paul Kersey.
Yeah, don't date Paul Kersey because nothing good is going to come of it. Even if it's your girlfriend's daughter, you're in for shit. But yeah, it's one of the biggest action franchises of the 70s. It has a very interesting story arc from where it starts to where it ends. But Paul Kersey is this guy he's the last guy you think is going to be affected. In fact, that's a lot of what the movie is about, because he's a successful architect he's like the last person you think is going to be affected by crime, inner city crime. But then it happens to him. The film itself takes a very sort of questionable look on. In fact, there's some lines in the movie that are sort of like, I'm sure even by 70s standards were a little.
Oh yeah, this movie had people pissed off in 1974, and for good reason.
Yeah, but at the same time, if you separate yourself from that, I think we've already talked on this podcast, I'm a big fan of the 70s vigilante films and movies like Vigilante. There's a whole wealth of these movies up until like the early mid 80s. And I'm just a fan of the genre. And obviously, as a fan of the genre, Death Wish is sort of like the godfather of the genre. Ultimately, if you watch it for escapism, it's just a story of Charles Bronson being the most Charles Bronson-y, just giving dudes beady-eyed looks and, kicking ass. And it's a lot of fun. I mean, I still get a kick out of it. I rewatch them all the time. Nothing for me beats Death Wish 3, because that is literally like a cartoon. It got so over the top, but in the most amazing way possible.
That's it. Deadpool was the Death Wish 3 of the Dirty Harry movies. I would say Magnum Force is the... No, Magnum Force is the one that's it's almost apologizing for the vigilantism displayed by... I know he's not a vigilante because he's a cop, but it's... But
he's on the border. He's on the border. But yeah, I mean, definitely though...
But he shoots the guy... I mean, usually he has his Magnum. I'm pretty sure at the end of
Magnum Force?
No, of Deadpool. Almost said Drowning Pool, which is a Paul Newman movie.
That's right.
At the end of Deadpool, I think he actually does kill the guy with a rocket launcher. So I mean, it's getting
that's
to
true.
That
okay,
level of extreme.
That is true. I do stand corrected, and
it's a giant harpoon. That's what it was.
Yeah, exactly. But I do see the parallels with the over the topness. That's true. In fact, Death Wish is definitely a movie that very influential, had a big impact. I don't know where it stood exactly in the ranking of most successful, highest box office gross, but it was a successful movie that made tons of sequels. So you have to talk about it. And again, I know
the first one is legitimately considered a classic, even though it's got kind of the fascist fantasy.
Yeah, and exactly. And everything they basically blame crime on poor inner city people. We'll leave it at that. But yeah, no, and it is of the franchise. It is the one that's the most artfully handled.
It's well shot.
Yeah, it's really well shot. It's well acted. I mean,
yeah, Bronson's good.
Yeah,
it was almost Jack Lemmon, which I think would have been more like the book.
Yes,
it's like the only time in history where Bronson got the role from Jack Lemmon.
That's Oh my goodness! But yeah, it's definitely like though. If you haven't seen it, definitely see it. It's worth. You have to see it. If you're a film lover, you have to see it. I mean, if you're a film person, it's the type of thing that you probably should have an opinion on, regardless of which side that opinion falls on. The Bronson connection actually continues, though, because that same month that Death Wish was released, Mr. Majestic was also released. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
And Mr. Majestic is a little bit more of a summertime fun kind of action movie than Death Wish.
Yeah.
Yes. It's just about a farmer who wants to count his damn watermelons. Script by Elmore Leonard. One of I believe it's one of the few ones that he wrote originally as a script, and he later novelized it, I believe. This is before he was really known for movies at all, and back when he was still doing kind of Western sort of stuff in terms of his novel writing, before he got into the crime style that became kind of what shaped Quentin Tarantino, and especially Jackie Brown, which is based on Elmore Leonard's Rum Punch. But Mr. Majestic it's a fun movie if you get a chance. If you need to cleanse the palate after Death Wish, even if you like Death Wish, it can be a bit of a downer.
Yeah, that's right.
So pop on Mr. Majestic after that, and just kind of sit back and watch Charles Bronson be a badass in where is it, Colorado or Utah or something?
Someplace with mountains.
And to follow the Vigilante line to another movie that's considered to be problematic but is also beloved, Foxy Brown came out in 1974.
That's right, yes. In fact, it was a good year overall. There was a lot of blaxploitation movies that came out this year. But
we got to do something about the name of that subgenre, but...
Yeah. I mean, at this point, if it's celebrated by the community that it sort of exploited, like if they celebrate it, then I'm okay with calling it that. If they decide that title doesn't work,
well, it's innocently titled. Exploitation is such a vague term.
Yeah.
It really has more to do with where it played than what the movie is about. Exploitation movies played in primarily grindhouses and drive-ins.
Yeah, that's right.
But kung fu movies played in those places. Spaghetti westerns played in those places. And exploitation could be anything from a low-budget car chase film to H.G. Lewis's gore films to Russ Meyer actually made some really highly artistic sexploitation films. So the exploitation term is just to exploit the topic. It's not to exploit a culture or a race or anything like that. So,
but I will say that one thing though, that because I do think where you're 100% right, but I do think the one difference though with blaxploitation is that it was at first there you had white people who were basically like kind of making money off of a very real subculture of the urban black experience, which there's some issues there. But what I do love about blaxploitation was that it became a way that, one, you started actually seeing black filmmakers making their own movies, and saying like, fuck this, I'm going to make, like if somebody's going to make a dime off this, I'm going to make a dime off this. But it also, unlike, even the kung fu movies, or it was a way that you saw black voices in cinema that you hadn't seen before, very real. You saw them as heroes. You saw them as a lot more truthfully. A lot of it is over the top and silly, but then you do have an element of what was really going on with the real music and the real fashion. And I do think there's a weird juxtaposition there, a weird dichotomy that on one hand there is a truly exploitative element, especially when those films started, but there was also like a little bit of cultural renaissance that was happening there a little bit. So
it really was a mix.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think even the movement's writers will even admit, like, hey, this is where black actors started to get jobs, black directors started to actually get attention.
That's right.
You can point to Sweet Sweetback and Shaft, Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song, and the film Shaft as kind of being the start. And those were by black filmmakers. That was Melvin Van Peebles and Gordon Parks, respectively. And then Gordon Parks' son did Superfly. And Superfly is a little bit more problematic because it was glorifying a pimp, a cocaine dealing pimp.
Yeah.
So that's where the problematic elements started to come in. Nobody really had a problem with a black private dick who's a sex machine with all the chicks. Shut your mouth. But that was when it kind of started to turn in with Foxy Brown, since we're on this angle now. That was directed by a white man. Same guy, Jack Hill, who also directed Coffee, and he directed Switchblade Sisters, and who has gone on record as being somebody who's not there to exploit, but to rather celebrate not just the black experience, but the female experience, such as Switchblade Sisters. With Foxy Brown, you get Pam Grier, who...
Yeah.
Like when I think of the iconic actresses who came from the 70s, you think Ellen Burstyn, Sissy Spacek, even Faye Dunaway, even though she'd had some success in the 60s. None of them have the power of Pam Grier. She was the first female action star, black or otherwise. Yep. And that is pretty incredible. And in this film, she poses as a prostitute in order to get into the ring that had killed her lover. And was messing with her brother. There's definitely some exploitive elements of that. There's gratuitous nudity, but these were also things, the nudity and all that, that's not necessarily something that I pin on the artists, not even the writers and directors. This was often the producers who were showing their films, as we said, in drive-ins and grindhouses, that were saying, if you don't have nudity, you don't have a movie. You don't have my money. So these things were kind of necessary evils to get these things made in the first place. But Foxy Brown is maybe a little bit of a convoluted story, but it's a fully entertaining action film and definitely empowering in the end.
Yeah, no, I couldn't. It
makes its own statement on vigilante justice as well, because the boyfriend who gets killed was an undercover police officer, and she goes to get revenge for him.
Yeah, I think Pam Grier, who doesn't love Pam Grier? Like, she literally had everything. She had looks. She was one of the most incredible looking people. She's just an incredible looking human being. But she had what she might have lacked in finesse or, classically trained actors. She had so much presence and she had so much charisma. She literally when they say command the screen, like Pam Grier did that every frame of the second. And she was also kind of weirdly even with how bad some of the action in blaxploitation films is, she was also very believable at kicking ass. You'd almost be afraid of Pam Grier. So
not almost. I'm not messing with Pam Grier.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly. I feel you on that. But yeah, I think I remember. I for the listeners, I remember the first time I saw it was at your house, of course. In fact, I think I would say 75% of the blaxploitation films I've probably seen with you for the first time. Yeah, because that's what I think.
Believable.
Yeah, that you were definitely very well educated in that genre. It's one of the ones that I think sticks with me the most. And I do think there are some other blaxploitation films that are more Sugar Hill is on this list. There's some other ones that I think that I love maybe more, or that because they're so over the top or goofier because they contain just weird elements like zombies and all goofy shit. It's one of the most famous blaxploitation films for a reason. It is literally, I would say Shaft and Foxy Brown are probably the two most famous and most well-respected.
Probably. I agree with you there. I think
Coffee,
Coffee's the better movie, I would think. Again, also by Jack Hill and also starring Pam Grier. In fact, Foxy Brown started off as a Coffee sequel.
Oh, I didn't know that, really?
Yeah, that's why you never find out what Foxy does for a living, is because it was written as she was a nurse, because that's what Coffee was. And then they had to cut out anything that involved her being a nurse and, just kind of, she's a professional badass in Foxy Brown.
Yeah. Interesting. I didn't know that. But yeah, Coffee, I was going to say Coffee's great. It's I'm trying to think of if there's another in that same, obviously the thing is there's actually a ton of blaxploitation films that I do think have some sort of, there's a love or a sort of a renown for them. Like I said, I've never actually even been a fan of Superfly. What wasn't a movie that necessarily grabbed me or that I've ever felt the need after I watched it to watch again. And again, I don't know, there's something, and I might be off, but there was always something uglier about that movie. And maybe it is because of the subject matter about
it. It's more,
it's harder to root for, I guess. But
yeah, exactly. It's harder. The villain is literally the man, and that's easy to root for.
Yeah.
In terms of let's get the man.
That's right.
But like I said, Shaft was a detective. Sweetback was being persecuted. Foxy Brown's getting revenge on a wrong that's been done on her and her community. They all have something that they're really defending. Whereas Superfly, he's trying to make one last score so he can get out of the business. Basically, he's fighting for early retirement. And
that's right.
And I've seen it multiple times. I've seen it in the theater a few times. In fact, I think I saw it with your twin brother once in the theater, and I think I can still hear him laughing at the pants that one guy is wearing in one. Because that's the other thing about these movies really did have style, and I think that's why even some of the bad ones stick with us, is the style is so over the top. And a lot came out in 74. It wasn't just Foxy Brown, although that was the most notable.
No, there was a lot.
You mentioned Sugar Hill, which is a rare blaxploitation horror film that kind of follows in the vein, no pun intended, of kind of the Dr. Phibes films, where it's just kind of creative revenge throughout the whole movie. Truck Turner, which was a big starring role for Isaac Hayes, who had become popular for scoring blaxploitation films. Willie Dynamite came out in 74, which is another pimp movie that's really only particularly notable because he's played by, I'm going to blank on his name, Roscoe. I know he's Gordon from Sesame Street. That's why I remember.
Oh, really?
Willie Dynamite. Yes, Gordon from Sesame Street plays a pimp.
I've never even heard of this movie.
I'm going to kick myself as soon as we're done. The name's going to come to me. But yes, Gordon from Sesame Street as a pimp. And it's not a great movie, but it's notable for that little fun fact.
Were you talking about Roscoe Orman?
Roscoe Orman. There we go. Roscoe Orman played Willie Dynamite. And for some reason, when Napoleon Dynamite came out, before I saw it and my friends were talking about it, because my friends had seen a preview of it, I kept on saying it, when are we going to go see Willie Dynamite? When are we going to go see Willie Dynamite? And then I saw it, and now it's only Napoleon Dynamite. But yeah, I kept on mixing up those titles when Napoleon first came out.
No, but it's funny because Napoleon Dynamite sounds more like a blaxploitation movie.
You're right. You almost made me spit up coffee. Sorry. Well, from the films of 42nd Street, let's maybe move on to one of the comics of 42nd Street. The movie Lenny, directed by Bob Fosse, which was nominated for a bunch of stuff, didn't win anything, but really deserves to be examined. Like I said, it's such a hard year. It's hard to argue that anybody was robbed of an Oscar or anybody shouldn't have won what they won. It's just kind of unfortunate that Lenny got brushed under the rug. But it's Dustin Hoffman playing Lenny Bruce in what is kind of a part mockumentary, part reenactment, which is something that I've done in my own writing, something that Lenny inspired in me, was to write actually an Orson Welles story in kind of a half mockumentary, half reenactment sort of way. But it tells the story of Lenny Bruce from his start as a Catskills comic, doing kind of Take My Wife Please kind of material, through, for anyone that's not familiar with Lenny Bruce, through his more controversial era where he started to use four-letter words and he started to talk about topics like sex and racism on stage, which a lot of people found to be obscene. And he got arrested. And I think some sort of a mix of chemical imbalance in his own head that previously existed, mixed with the paranoia, mixed with the heroin that he was taking at the time, because he was hanging out with a lot of jazz people and heroin was like candy in a lot of those circles. He just kind of lost his mind. Yeah, he lost his mind and he took it up on stage and would lose his mind on stage. He did performances where he was wearing nothing but a trench coat, and it was not because he was trying to make a statement. It was just because somebody put a trench coat on him because he was probably naked back there, and just started to read transcripts back of court cases that he'd fought instead of tell jokes. And he became obsessed. He became a lawyer. He never even graduated high school, but he studied enough law to have passed the bar in trying to defend himself against these obscenity charges. And he really kind of became public enemy number one for a lot of communities that he played in. And Hoffman plays him perfect. He uses Lenny Bruce's actual act when he's on stage, and then obviously, you know, he's making it up off stage. But it's kind of interesting that they use a lot of Bruce's actual jokes. And I have to say, looking back from a modern standpoint, even when he's at his peak, I just don't find a lot of what Lenny Bruce says funny. But I find a lot of what he says important. Yeah. Not important because it needed to be said necessarily, but important that we don't censor ourselves, and important that we don't allow the authorities to censor us and tell us what topics we can talk about and what topics we can't talk about. I disagree with a lot of his philosophies on life, but I firmly agree that he had every right to say it in whatever way he wanted to say it. And if people were willing to put down money to hear him say it, then you got something on fire there. And he was taken out too early in life. He ended up dying of an overdose. And it was probably because of all the stress that he was under for fighting for our rights to speak freely in public. Did you ever see Lenny?
I did, yeah. In fact, I rented it from the Alameda Library, public library. Once again, thanks, Alameda Public Library. Yeah,
I've never been there.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. I have to say, this is a personal thing. I love Dustin Hoffman as an actor, as a human being. Apparently, there's some things that come out, but as an actor, obviously he's a legend. But I was well versed in Lenny Bruce before the movie, and he just doesn't look like Lenny Bruce to me, and that took me out of it a little bit. But the performance is great. I do think it, like a lot of biopics, I feel like there's definitely slower part, like pace. Like, I don't know. I remember the first time we sat through it, I was like kind of expecting to love it more, but I didn't. Not that it's bad in any way. I think I thought I was going to like it more, but it's super important because I even challenge you to say what he was saying was actually important. Not necessarily like, well, I guess I do agree with you. It's not even the content of what he was saying, even though a lot of what he was saying was, it was specifically about, like, as an artist, as somebody who is expressing ideas, like censorship is, I mean, he ultimately, even comedians who sort of, even this day, he's idolized by a lot of comedians, but not necessarily because he was explicitly funny, which,
as a comic, Mort Saul was better. As a comic, George Carlin was better. Richard Pryor was better.
He was pushing boundaries. He was pushing boundaries before George Carlin, before...
he kicked the door in for those guys.
Exactly. And he became a sort of, much like Bill Hicks, but Bill Hicks was actually funny. He was a warrior for freedom of speech. He was a warrior for, ideas and being able to, communicate ideas to a public. And and I mean and that's ultimately, and that's what the film, even the film itself, that's what the point of the film is. Like, it's about how, he let this crusade, because it was such an important thing. And again, people, a lot of his, at a certain point, even his fans were sort of, okay, enough, dude. And again, a lot of it, like you said, him reading his court documents on stage instead of telling jokes and stuff, people sort of were tired of what he was doing, even though what he was doing was still important. But again, ultimately, it ended up costing him. Like I said, it became his number one obsession. It cost him his relationships and friendship stuff. So it is a good movie. Like I said, I think to this day, and it's a problem with me for biopics, and I think it's a personal problem where there's some biopics where the actor doesn't look at all like the person they're playing, but there's something about the acting that sort of makes me forget. But in this, I think because he was using actual material, literally almost like verbatim, recorded things that, I don't know. It's a good movie.
And the last shot at the end of the movie, it ends on his death, obviously. That's not a spoiler, because if you know anything about anything, Lenny Bruce died. But the photograph that Bob Fosse used was actually, that's his real death photo. So he was going for this element of realism. And you're right, Dustin Hoffman does not particularly look like him. I don't know who I would cast from that era who would. There was an actor that played him on Broadway that looked a little bit more like him. I can't remember his name right now. If you want to see him, he's actually, ironically enough, in Bob Fosse's All That Jazz. When the character Joe Gideon's based on Bob Fosse, so it's an autobiographical film. Yeah. And Joe Gideon is editing a movie during his the rehearsals for a new play and All That Jazz, and really overextending himself. And when he goes into the editing booth, what he's editing is the stand-up performance that is by the guy who played the Lenny Bruce character on Broadway, who probably would have played the role in the movie if the producers probably insisted on a star.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
And so the performance and All That Jazz that he's editing is probably a nod of appreciation to this actor who he intended to probably cast in Lenny.
There you go.
That would be my guess.
Yeah, no, you're probably spot on. Yeah, I think my biggest thing was just, even when he was young, or like before he really started going downhill, Lenny Bruce always had this like hound dog, like tired, exhausted, sort of just beaten by life look. I think it's like he had droopy eyes and heavy eyelids. Like he just looked like a dude that's just been chain smoking and kind of losing his mind a little bit. And just, that's not Hoffman's vibe. Like that's just not, but either way, that's a nitpick. I do get, biopics are it's a hard thing with me, because and most biopics are usually kind of questionable to begin with. They become very hollow. I think in the 70s, like Coal Miner's Daughter, which is one of my favorite movies ever, by one of my favorite actresses. In fact, that's a biopic movie that fucking nails it. But in this day and age, you have all of the,
there's more of an intense pressure nowadays to be factual in a biopic, whereas in the 70s you could still get away. People couldn't fact check you as easily. They couldn't just go on Wikipedia or
But I will say this: like, if you look at, like, say, Coal Miner's Daughter, there's a lot, especially between her and Dew. Like, there's a lot of ugliness into the relationship that's very real. Like, a lot of there's some
but that was
abuse.
Loretta Lynn wrote the book, though, that it was based on. So that was her holding the mirror up to herself. We didn't have the benefit of Lenny Bruce writing something about himself.
That's true. And that's the thing is too. And again, it's not to take it away. It is a very well made film, and it is a good biopic. I just did for me sometimes the casting can. I just look for you. Yeah, exactly. I just look at Dustin Hoffman and I'm like, I just see Dustin. I think that's what it is. That's probably, I just look at Dustin Hoffman and I'm just like, what is Dustin Hoffman doing? Like, anyways, because he's always played very similar characters. But anyways, great movie. Definitely a quality film.
For the next thing, I'm just going to mention this. No real reason to go far into it because most people who know it. But because I mentioned my Orson Welles script being somewhat inspired by the structure of Lenny, it was really the only thing I took from it for mine. But I did take a lot of inspiration from Orson Welles had a film out in 1974 called F for Fake that many would call a documentary. He called it a film essay, which I think is a more appropriate term for what it is. It's an experimental sort of thing. He's showcasing one of the great forgers of art who creates forgeries of classical artists that even the experts can't determine whether the work is of this forger or of the original artist. It's a really cool story. It's an even more interesting way to tell the story. It's Welles being Welles, and it's a good movie, but it's hard to not mention when Orson Welles releases a film. And I'll just run down real quick. Orson Welles had a movie this year. Peter Bogdanovich had Daisy Miller. Billy Wilder released The Front Page. Some of the best directors of all time were still working in 1974. And I think that's worthy of mentioning, that we still had some of the traditional greats of that era who were putting things out. Maybe not necessarily their best work, but interesting nonetheless.
One movie I do want to quickly mention as definitely having importance is Female Trouble.
Yes.
I feel like John Waters is, I would say he's an acquired taste. Like definitely his films are not for everybody, but I can tell you right now, if you're a friend of mine, it's because you probably get John Waters movies. You get the brilliance of Divine.
And Female Trouble is my favorite, actually.
Of all of his films?
I love Female Trouble. I think that's my favorite of all of his films.
I mean, I love Female Trouble. It'd be hard to pick a favorite. I do. I mean, even when he in that era when he started to cross over to more, safer material, like with Serial Mom and stuff, I still love John Waters. I mean, one of the very first dates with my wife. Yeah, I do. I will say, I love, Pecker. There's a lot I'm a fan of. I will say, I wanted to love it, but I'm forgetting the name. The one that's sort of about it was more like it's basically about sex and sex
Dirty
kinks.
Shame.
Was it a Dirty Shame?
Yeah, Dirty Shame. It was the one that came out. It was NC-17, and it was his big return to the X rating, even though the X rating didn't exist anymore, with Johnny Knoxville.
Yes, and
Tracy Ullman.
Yes, correct. So I didn't love that. It wasn't my favorite. But
you saw the NC-17 version, though. There was an R-rated version that was worthless. So
I don't
perhaps
know
you didn't like it because you didn't see the.
So I don't know. I mean, well, that's interesting. Now I have to look that up.
Yeah, I won't stream it because I'm pretty sure everything that's streaming of it is the R-rated version. So the NC-17 version is getting harder and harder to find, and it's not the unrated version. It's specifically the NC-17 version. But it was, in my mind, that was not a return to the brilliance of the Female Trouble era, but a good return to the dirty fun of it.
No, yeah, and that's the thing, is that's why I was excited. I just think ultimately, in my head it was going to be maybe I did see the R-rated, maybe I didn't see the NC-17, but it just didn't. And if I'm being honest, I think maybe I felt like it was trying too hard. Like he was trying too hard to capture, Mondo Trasho and Multiple Maniacs, Pink Flamingos era John Waters. But I mean, and again, when I say that, I didn't hate the movie, it just wasn't, especially because Cecil B. Demented, Pecker was sort of more in the.
Those two, Pecker and Cecil B. Demented, are the ones that were a little bit more of a letdown to me, but I still appreciate it.
Yeah, I would say Pecker was his least. There's good aspects. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, it's where I heard the term teabagging the first time. But I think with Cecil B. Demented, I felt like he was trying to do something a little bit bigger or make more of a point about. I don't know. I can definitely see your point. But yeah, anyways, Female Trouble, great. It's got Divine. It's in that era when he was still trying to make art. very like boundary pushing art and stuff. But it's great. Mink Stole, Divine, like what can you say?
David Lochry and Mink Stole are my favorite parts of Female Trouble. Like they just hit. Divine hits it out of the park too. She hits it out of the park every time. David Lochry was his last film. He died of a PCP overdose. How often do you hear about PCP overdoses?
That's true, yeah.
Outside of John Waters' crew. But Mink Stole is still with us, and she's still doing conventions and stuff like that. So you might run into Mink Stole eventually.
I think to be honest, I probably have seen her at conventions for as many conventions as I did or used to do. But yeah, and I mean, it's got the whole cast of characters. But I will say, Donald and Donna Dasher, like their aesthetic in that, I think is I used to like kids who'd never even seen that movie used to just put their like photos and shit on Tumblr for the longest time. But yeah, definitely, I would say Female Trouble. I still love Polyester, and I think there's a sweetness to or like it was him trying to make like a Cirque movie. Like it was very much trying to make like this like melodrama.
It was definitely him doing a Cirque movie. Everything he does, Female Trouble was him doing a juvenile delinquent movie. Everything he does.
That's absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. 100%. But yeah, that era of John Waters to me is just, but another movie I want to talk about that's not as bawdy and as crazy, but I feel like it's probably one of the best movies of its decade. And I'm surprised it's taken us this long to talk about is A Woman Under the Influence.
Oh, yes.
So, I discovered Cassavetes in my 20s, probably my mid-20s.
It's a good time to discover Cassavetes.
I agree. Yeah, it's definitely, especially at that time. Like, I don't want to you and I are a little long in the tooth, but but yeah, there was like this time in the 90s when you started to see there was like the birth of the indie film culture, and you started seeing movies by guys like Wes Anderson and P.T. Anderson's guys, but there was a lot of like you could see a lot of influence. There was a time when, and I know young people don't get this, but there was a time when you saw something new and you wanted to be like, I wonder what inspired this person. And you sort of started to do what I like to call crate digging, where you just started to kind of go back. And this is even pre really the internet. So you had to, read books or find magazines.
You had to really dig to find info on the people that you like.
Exactly. But, I remember just a lot of people I liked at the time would bring up Cassavetes and what he was doing, in the 60s and in the 70s, as far as like kind of, there's a lot of improvisational things that he was doing. And like, but, he told human stories about human people. At this time, this period of his thing, like Killing of a Chinese Bookie, and he was just crushing it. But I think Woman of the Influence is probably, in my personal opinion, I think it's his best movie. I think it's the two of the best pieces of acting I've ever seen in any movie.
Yeah. If Ellen Burstyn hadn't won for Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, then I would have cried that Gina Rowlands was robbed for this movie.
Yeah, and I will even go on record as saying I still think she deserved it. And Ellen Burstyn's amazing. She's always been amazing. And you feel for her, but dude, people know Peter Falk as Columbo. Like they know him as a certain character, this certain type,
or the grandfather in Princess Bride.
There you go. But goddamn, it's one of the most like upsettingly real movies. Like to see this, like, oh my god, this is. Just
the whole movie feels voyeuristic. It feels like you're eavesdropping on this couple.
Dude, you nailed it exactly. 100%, could not agree more. That's the perfect analogy. You feel almost like you shouldn't be watching it. Like, and Peter Falk is just like, he breaks your heart, and like his love for Gina Rowland and everything that she's putting him through, and it's so hard to watch. But there's these outbursts of violence and like that I think are still some of the most they're so authentic and so honest that it's one of the most I'll watch a Serbian film, I'll watch any of these terrifying, like quote unquote upsetting horror movies, and I won't bat an eye. But A Woman Under the Influence breaks my heart. It makes me like it tenses
you up. It makes you cry. It makes you think. It makes you wonder about your neighbors. It makes you
exactly
or your own family.
That's right.
And Falk is amazing. And there's moments where he does lash out and you're like, oh, no, he shouldn't have done that. But you see where he's coming from. You see how he's at his own wit's end. And
he's been pushed past his point. Yeah.
They never really go into detail as to what exactly Gina Rowland's problem is, whether it's a pre-existing thing or whether this is brought on by the stress of life or alcoholism. They even imply at one point where she goes to a bar and picks up a dude and just drinks like a full glass of Cutty Sark or something.
Dude, yes.
and they don't go into detail. You never see her in the hospital or anything like that. You just know that she's losing her mind, and that Peter Falk is trying to protect his family, and he's trying to protect her, and that he loves them all as much as any human being could possibly love their family. But it drives him mad to love them so much.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing is, exactly, he doesn't know how to deal with the situation.
He's not a smart guy. He's just trying to deal with it.
That's the thing is, he's the most just real dude. Like, he's just a normal guy. Like I said, he's just a guy, just a working class kind of guy who loves his woman, who, just is. And that's the one thing I love about it. And that's what I think Cassavetes is so good at, is there's a level of ambiguity that just doesn't need to be explained. We get it. We don't need to, oh, well, she's a paranoid schizophrenic, or she's bipolar, or she has, associative. We don't care. It's not the point. It's that would almost, it
would cheapen it to know what the diagnosis
exactly
is.
You just know she has lost it. She's
highs and lows and on her way to a breakdown.
Manic. Yeah, and it's heartbreaking to watch because it's so fucking real. To this day, there's been a handful of movies the first time I watched them where afterwards I was just dead silent because I was like, I have to process that. And that's definitely one of the first ones that come to mind. It's brilliant. And I mean, everything that, Cassavetes, which, I've heard a lot of people kind of talk shit on Cassavetes over the years recently, like say he's overrated and stuff. But dude, like
he represents a time and a place. There's no way that he could be overrated. He's just not current. He's just not where film is now. And his films are not necessarily where life is now. Like the lack of a diagnosis, there's just as much of a chance that was not a conscious decision. It was just that people weren't aware of what could be diagnosed at that time. Doctors certainly might have been, but
I would say like another movie even would have said like brought up her past, or she talked to a shrink, or just come out and said she's an alcoholic, she's a drug addict. There's implied things in there, but they don't. Because again, I feel like it was a concept. Maybe I'm giving. No,
you're probably right. You're probably right. And I am going to take back my opinion. By the way, I do now believe that Gina Rowlands was robbed of the Oscar. You're right.
I mean, it's once you see the movie, it's like, yeah. I mean, at the time, I turned it off, and I was like, I think at the time, I think that's the best performance I've ever seen in anything. And this is, and the thing is, the 70s was the greatest decade for actors. I think actors today would be like, I wish I could have been in films.
Yeah.
Like, you had in the 70s, because it really was a sort of, as an actor, it was just sort of like Disneyland, because there's so many different roles or whatever, and so many how many great performances. But one thing is that I felt like it was a great decade for actresses, female actors. I feel like the 70s, you had, again, I mean, Sissy Spacek will probably always be my favorite actress, just because certain roles, and there's something I connect with Sissy Spacek. But there's so many, and then even like whether it was horror films or science fiction films or dramas, not so much comedies, but I'm sure if I thought about it, I just could bring up a few. But there's just a strong, there's a lot of really great roles for women, and even women that weren't 20 and attractive, or like, I don't know how old Gina Rowlands was when she made that movie, but she wasn't necessarily.
She wasn't young. She was.
Yeah.
She was old enough, mid-40s.
I was going to say, yeah, exactly. And today, in this day and age, if you're actors in your 40s, you're playing grandmothers, and like,
true.
As somebody in their 40s, that breaks my heart. But yeah, I feel like
she was married to John Cassavetes, which isn't to say that she slept her way into the role. That's not what I'm implying at all.
No. In fact, yeah.
I bring it up mainly because there is a story as to how this became a movie. He wanted to write something for his wife because he knew how talented she was, and they kind of came up with this idea together. But John Cassavetes planned for it to be a stage play, and Gina Rowlands talked him out of it. She says, it has to be a movie. And he says, why does it have to be a movie? He says, because I can't do this 8 times a week. I can do this once, and you better have a camera rolling.
That is dude, exactly. I don't know how anybody could do it twice. I mean, doing it more. I mean, dude, she had to have been, just utterly exhausted. Like, but yeah, I mean, again, a lot of his earlier films and stuff, like I said, I think, was it Criterion who released?
Yes, Criterion has an amazing box set out.
Yeah, I think that's one I have that has Woman of the Influence, Killing of Chinese Bookie, Minnie and Moskowitz, Faces, Husbands. Mm-hmm. I forget which ones are it, but I mean tons. But again, all of them are great. I mean, literally, Minnie and Moskowitz again. Oh god damn! Like, what a movie.
Cassell.
Yep. Oh God damn, dude. So anyways, I could talk about this all day, but anyways,
and then
yeah.
To put another final spin on it, just to kind of point out that this is not the type of movie they were making in 74 either. He could not get financing for this movie to save his life, and he was mortgaging his own house. He couldn't come up with it. Peter Falk, who was a friend and collaborator, had done other films with him. Peter Falk used Columbo money to finance this movie. So thank God for Columbo, because it gave us one of the best independent films ever made. And then once it was made, no matter how powerful it was, Cassavetes couldn't get anybody to show it. So he literally tucked it under his arm and went from theater to theater and got people to show this. And he finally got it into some film festivals. But again, not based on the power of the movie, which is so weird. He got into a couple of festivals because Martin Scorsese was in love with the movie. And he said that he wouldn't allow the festivals to run Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore if they didn't also take Woman Under the Influence.
There you go.
So this was it's almost like a family effort to get this movie made. These were all people that are very close to each other in real life.
And it was, and that's the thing is too, like I said, it wasn't, I don't know if it won anything. It didn't have like obviously in the year that movies like Godfather Part 2 come out, obviously it's not going to, be, it's not going to shine as brightly because just you had so many great movies come out that year. But I definitely feel like even at the time it was underappreciated. But this is also a decade or also a year specifically when Herbie movies were still coming out. Yeah, Benji was coming out. So
the first Benji, yes.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I feel like definitely if you love movies, if you love cinema, if you like acting, dude, a warning though, this movie will fuck you up. It will make you feel all kinds of emotions. But yeah,
you'll either want to drink or a nap or both when this movie's done.
Exactly. Drink while napping. Yeah.
To point out a couple of directing debuts that came out in 1974. I'll leave it up to you if you want to go into any details on these, because some of these are really good movies. Like I said before, there were a lot of filmmakers like Billy Wilder and Orson Welles making movies in 74, or Ingmar Bergman. But you also had the first films of Jonathan Demme with Caged Heat, Michael Cimino with Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, which is one of my favorites. I don't know if you've ever seen Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, but everybody should. It's Clint Eastwood, one of his best. Jeff Bridges. In fact, Jeff Bridges was nominated for an Oscar in it.
Did I see that at your house? I think I might have seen it with you.
Probably. It's a heist comedy, and really, that's one of my favorite things in the world is a good heist comedy. You also had the directing debut of Steven Spielberg. He did make another feature, but it's lost, and it was something that he made for $500 when he was 17, so I don't know that I count it. And he'd made a couple of TV movies, including Duel, but he had his first domestic theatrical release film, which was the Sugarland Express, starring Goldie Hawn and the always underrated William Atherton, who really should have been a big star instead of just the asshole in Ghostbusters and Real Genius.
He is sort of like
some people got an asshole face, just
he does, yeah.
And he's perfect in those.
I'm glad you brought up Real Genius though too, because he doesn't get enough respect for being the asshole in that movie.
But he was amazing in Sugarland Express, and he's the following year in 75 he did The Day of the Locust, which I think is one of the most underplayed movies of all time. But that was the start of Steven Spielberg. By the next year he'd be directing Jaws, and I saved the best for last. This is one I know is close to your heart. John Carpenter started in 1974 with Dark Star.
I was going to get there. Yeah, we can definitely talk about Dark Star. Have you actually seen Dark Star?
A couple of times, and there's reasons to be underwhelmed, but also reasons to be impressed.
Yeah, it was a fun movie. I think the biggest thing is that it's John Carpenter and Dan O'Bannon together. I think that's its main, its main thing. But film-wise, or vibe-wise, is very different from stuff that John Carpenter would later do. It was definitely more satirical and
it's genuinely funny.
Genuinely funny, but
in a time when you didn't see sci-fi comedies.
Exactly. It's a fun little flick. It's not a great movie, but it's fun. It's worth a watch.
It's a student film that got extra funding to stretch out to a feature. That's literally what it was.
Exactly. But definitely, it goes down in history because it launched two very important careers.
The director of The Thing with the writer of Alien.
That's right. And let's also not forget the greatest zombie movie ever, Return of the Living Dead, which I'm literally staring at. I have both posters for part 1 and part 2, which he had nothing to part. I still love. But yeah, I mean, it's not a great movie, but definitely important because the careers it launched. But definitely worth, like I said, worth a fun. Like I said,
and Oliver Stone with Seizure. I just got to throw that out before I forget it. Oliver Stone started in '74 as well.
Seizure, yep. Which I've never seen. Have you seen it?
I have. It's bizarre. It's really bizarre, and it's kind of cool to see Jonathan Frid in something that's not Dark Shadows.
That is interesting.
I'd like to see it again before I really give like a full opinion on it, because it's been several years since I saw it, and the copy I saw was like a bootleg copy that looked like it'd been run through the mud. It's now fully available now, but for years you could only get it as a ancient VHS copy or a bootleg.
Yeah, I've never seen it. I mean, I've heard about it. It's I have a very contentious relationship with Oliver Stone.
So do most people, and it's pretty warranted.
Yeah, I mean, he has very high, extreme highs and lows. But I'm trying to think of any. I know there was a few. We've gotten to again. We couldn't talk about every movie this year. Just so many movies. But I don't know if there's any other ones I wanted to talk about specifically, Devin. If you wanted to, rattle off a few more.
There's a couple that I'd love to talk about. There's one that I know you were mentioning that I love as well, and I'll let you kind of take it if you'd like. We haven't talked at all about Chinatown.
Oh, shit. Yeah, we haven't talked about Chinatown. That's
Jack
right,
Nicholson is my favorite actor of all time, so Chinatown's got to come up.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most incredible screenplays ever written.
It's the textbook screenplay. It's what they, at least when I was going to school, that's the screenplay they give you.
Yeah, I mean, it won Best Screenplay, right? Best Original Screenplay for the Oscars? I think it did. But yeah, it's a great movie. It did. Yeah.
And it beat Godfather Part 2 for the Golden Globe. As Best
did
Picture.
It?
Yes.
There you go. Okay.
And Nicholson won the Golden Globe for Best Actor.
It's funny, too, because I think, I haven't seen Chinatown in probably 15 years, but it doesn't feel like, especially in the mid-70s, it feels like Jack Nicholson's doing a different kind of role. Let me also, before we go on, let me just say, Roman Polanski is probably, I don't know if he's my favorite director, but fucking Christ, he's a brilliant director. But it's one of the most, it's become, when you say Chinatown, it's become shorthand for a certain kind of I don't know. There's just, people name drop Chinatown. I don't know. I think people maybe even name drop it without even fully, even having seen it or fully understanding it. But Roman Polanski obviously we don't need to go into why he's problematic and stuff.
He's a human piece of garbage, but he's got a lot of talent.
You have to separate the artist from the art. I get at some, but it's this weird sort of, I don't know if dreamlike is the right word.
No, but you're right. It is. There's an illusion sort of feeling to it. It's not dream as in a positive dream. It's not a nightmare either. It's just kind of... No, it's hazy.
That's right. There you go. It's very hazy. It doesn't have necessarily this...
Everybody's got something to hide.
Yeah.
The truth is not even what's appearing on screen for us. Nicholson's being jerked around from one direction to another.
It was Robert Evans. It was one of Robert Evans and Roman Polanski's movies they did together, right?
Yes,
it was. So, I mean, that their combination made some of my favorite. I mean, they just made incredible movies together. But I think this is definitely, even though it's not necessarily my favorite, it's definitely I don't know. I was gonna say it's Roman Polanski's best movie, but
I like The Tenant. If we're gonna get into Polanski, The Tenant is my favorite.
But see, I like A Knife in the Water. I mean, I love.
That's a good one too.
God damn it! That's the thing. It sucks because I hate the little fucking little creep, but god damn, he was a genius filmmaker. And just I love The Tenant. Jesus Christ, I love that movie. But again, I think Chinatown's probably the most well revered.
Yeah.
And again, I got off point, but one thing I like about Jack Nicholson, who I was literally just talking about right before we were this podcast, but I was talking about his Joker, but not necessarily in a positive way. But that's a different conversation. But he was known for having a specific energy, but he brings something. I feel like he's a lot more I don't know. I mean, I feel like people only when they think of Jack Nicholson, especially young Jack Nicholson, they think of movies like The Shining or One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, these sort of manic performances. But he was definitely more than that. But I don't know. He just has this weird. He feels like an older. It's hard to explain, but I just get this. I really like the performance, I guess is what I'm trying to say. He brings a different side of Jack Nicholson's performance, is sort of world weary, but also sort of I don't know. He feels like This isn't a noir movie, but even though set in the same kind of time frame, I guess.
It's definitely, it's the only reason it's not a noir movie is because it's not actually from the period. Yeah. Other than that, every other element of it is a noir movie. But
he has that same, he feels like he's very authentic to those kind of films. And that's, you know.
The anti-hero, the loser as he wins.
That's right. Perfect. Exactly. Which, you know, I think, you know, I think my favorite Jack Nicholson performance of all time is probably The Last Detail, but Chinatown is definitely one that, you know, it's not one of his more like, I think when you say Chinatown, people sometimes even forget it's Jack Nicholson and Faye Dunaway. I think
he's much more reserved.
That's exactly what I'm trying to say. Exactly. Like
I was just going to say, like in The Shining and Cuckoo's Nest in particular, or even Last Detail, his character is about being the center of attention. Everything that character is doing is, look at me, look at me, look at me. And in Chinatown, he's the one that's listening. He's the one that's picking up the clues. He's the one that's putting it together. And he's letting other people kind of take the show. Although there's still some great Nicholson moments.
Oh, absolutely. But, you know, it's one of those movies that, like, you know, it should be required viewing. And again, I've actually had friends that watched it and didn't like it. They didn't like the ambiguity of it. They didn't like, you know, the fact that it doesn't give you necessarily like a satisfying ending. Like,
no, not at all. And Faye Dunaway is great in it as well. And she does not let you be satisfied throughout the entire thing.
Exactly.
But intentionally and brilliantly.
Yeah. Brilliantly, absolutely. And fuck Faye Dunaway, man. Jeez, that's the thing is, man. That's what I'm saying. Like, there's a reason that like the '70s are sort of like I hold them in such high regard. I think most people who love cinema kind of do as well because you know, look who was doing their thing. I mean, all the directors you've named, all the actors we've talked about, those are still considered some of the greatest to ever have done it. So, and Chinatown is again, it's considered one of the most perfect scripts ever written. And like I said, obviously Roman Polanski is problematic, but fucking Christ, man, that guy just one movie after another just crushing it. Like, and you know, this is obviously one of those movies. So definitely glad you brought it up. I can't believe it slipped my mind because I kept thinking that we need to talk about Chinatown. We need to talk about Chinatown, and then I was just this has been what the listeners are going to listen to on this podcast isn't even what we've recorded. We recorded it much longer than you will listen to. So we've just, but yeah.
I'm letting this one go long though. I'd rather this one go long than do a part 3.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. So was there any other movies?
Oh yeah. Just a couple more shout outs. You know, you have, Warren Beatty doing The Parallax View, which is one of the great paranoia films of all time. You got my man Burt Reynolds did The Longest Yard this year.
So I have to say, this is one of my biggest shames, but I'm actually a fan of the remake. It's terrible.
Bert's in that too.
Yes, he is. In fact, is he playing the same character?
No, I don't think so. I've actually never seen the remake.
Because the remake is a piece of shit. But the remake features like half the cast as pro wrestlers. But it's super stupid, but it's one of those I don't even believe in guilty pleasures, kind of like there's such a thing as knowing a movie's bad but still liking it. But so whatever you want to call that, but it's one of those movies that I'll watch every now and then. But again, Chris Rock is great in it. I think actually Adam Sandler, even though he's playing, Adam Sandler has a tendency to cast himself as being this like macho, handsome dude that gets all ladies, and you're like, dude, I don't know if that's the most accurate casting. But in this, it's like it kind of works. And again, having Burt in the movie kind of, you know, I think his character is because he was also a Heisman Trophy winning. I don't know. I think there's at least it's a nod to his old character. But anyways, but yeah. So, but I still like the original Longest Yard. And again, it's Burt. We started this podcast by talking about Burt. So
exactly. See, in '74, you had Stallone and Henry Winkler coming to being in Lords of Flatbush. Which almost was also Richard Gere's first major film. Actually, kind of too bad that it wasn't, although he was fired from the film because Stallone said it was him or Gere.
They hate each other. Yeah, they
absolutely hate each other. Gere, I believe, has even gone so far as to accuse Stallone of starting the gerbil rumor.
I would not put it past lie.
The story goes basically that Gere was getting a little too method in his part. For those who haven't seen The Lords of Flatbush, it's kind of a slice of life movie. It's not particularly great. It's not bad at all, but it's not particularly great. It's trying to be American Graffiti, East Coast style. So it's about, young toughs in New York who feed their pigeons up on the roof and wear leather jackets. And it is where the Fonzie character came from, Henry Winkler,
That's right.
in a leather jacket. Yeah, I guess Gere was taking his part a little too seriously. And there's a scene where the character Gere was supposed to play gets into a fist fight with Stallone's character, and he was actually hitting him, and Stallone got pissed off. And one thing led to another. They just never got along, and finally Stallone got him fired. And so, yeah, Richard Gere has always blamed him for that and has always held it against him. Stallone has kind of implied that he wants to bury the hatchet, but I don't know.
Yeah. Would you be able to forgive the gerbil rumor? I don't know.
Allegedly.
I say allegedly, but I mean, it makes so much sense.
It really does. It really does. It sounds like something Stallone would do. But also you had Robert Mitchum, another one of my all-time heroes, put out The Yakuza, which was directed by Sidney Pollack.
Dude, that's one of the movies when we talked about movies I haven't seen. I actually thought I'd seen it. And then I was like researching. I was like, shit, I don't think I've seen this. And that's definitely a movie I need to see.
It's a good movie. It's worth seeing. There is a certain element of it just because Mitchum is not in his prime. And his co-star in it is supposed to be another guy that's roughly about the same age. I don't know if he is younger. He feels younger. He's a Japanese fighter who is like a former Yakuza in the story. And he goes in and fights dudes, rips off his shirt, has a big tattoo on his back, and totally kicking ass. And then every now and again, it'll cut to Mitchum with his two guns, like pointing. And you just know that Mitchum wasn't up to the action of a Yakuza movie. But man, he gives it his all, and and it's just fun to see Mitchum as an old man in an action. So I'll never put that down. There was also Shanks. I don't know if you ever saw Shanks, probably the most bizarre movie of 74, which is saying something. It was William Castle's last film.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
What is it about? I don't think I've even ever heard of it.
It is the one and only movie starring French mime Marcel Marceau. And this one had no gimmick like William Castle's classic gimmicks of like The Tingler or House on Haunted Hill. We should probably do an episode on William Castle. Castle's fascinating in and of himself.
Absolutely. Could not agree more.
But Shanks, his gimmick is simply that he got Marcel Marceau to do a movie. Now, Marcel Marceau had previously done a cameo in Mel Brooks's Silent movie, ironically as a mime, being the only person who had a line of dialogue in the Silent movie. Which is in fact, that is the joke. He plays a deaf mute in this movie. He also plays a mad scientist in a dual role, very heavy old age makeup. And the mad scientist has invited the deaf mute to come to his laboratory to assist him in basically life reanimation, because the deaf mute is a master puppeteer. And the old scientist has discovered a way to reanimate life, but not conscious life. It's kind of like he connects electrodes to a frog, as an example. And then when he adds the electricity, the frog moves, but the frog's still dead. It's not a zombie thing or a Frankenstein thing. It's just being able to animate dead tissue without any consciousness. And the old man dies, and Marcel Marceau, as the deaf mute, applies the technology to the mad scientist and realizes that he can turn humans into puppets. And the rest of the movie is, members of his household dying, and he turns them into puppets. And because it's 1974, for whatever inexplicable reason, they're attacked by a gang of bikers. And he has to pit his reanimated puppets against the bikers. And it's stupid. It's all kinds of stupid. He's trying to make a fairy tale of sorts, and he makes some really weird decisions along the way. But I will say that it's disturbing and like profoundly morbid. And I don't know how much of that is intentional, but it is very effective. So you probably will walk away. Some people will like it, some people won't. But regardless, there will be images from it that will stay with you for your life, because it's just so bizarre to see these. He's casted other mimes, clearly, to play these reanimated people. So you're getting kind of zombie effects with the weird body movements of mime acting, and it's haunting. So it's legitimately haunting. Also just almost too weird to exist. But it's called Shanks. It finally got a DVD release a couple of years ago. Otherwise, it was completely unavailable. I was able to rent it on Amazon, I believe it was, for like $3.99, just because I was curious what a Marcel Marceau movie would look like or sound like.
Yeah, more accurately, yes.
And realized later that it was a William Castle movie. But yeah, that one If you're adventurous, look for Shanks, but most people will not like it. I guarantee it. This was also the year that kind of gave us the buddy cop movie. Freebie and the Bean is largely credited for creating the buddy cop genre that spun out into things like 48 Hours and Lethal Weapon. Stars James Caan and Alan Arkin as the two cops, and they self-described it as kind of the odd couple in a squad car, which is pretty accurate. The script is really threadbare. It's not a strong script, and it's directed by Richard Rush, who went on to direct The Stuntman and got a lot of credit for The Stuntman. So it's very stunt heavy for a comedy. And in fact, I'd heard that it wasn't written as a comedy. It was written as a straightforward cop action movie. And it was the two actors who basically brought the comedy to it and insisted that it be made as a comedy. And Rush was on board with that. And then they'd get pissed off at him for focusing more on the stunts than on them. But these two actors, I wouldn't necessarily think to put James Caan and
Alan Arkin
in the same room, but they actually do have a really good chemistry. There's one scene, James Caan he's driving their squad car, they're chasing a dude. The dude just barely escapes by going around the front of a train. So they're stuck behind the train. And of course, again, being the 70s, there's a ramp that's right in the road in front of this train. And so James Caan takes it and he goes up through the train, through an empty cart, lands on the other side safely, and Arkin's freaking out. And Caan just seems surprised by himself being able to make it. He just looks and goes, ta-da, and keeps driving. Like, he doesn't say anything, it's just the ta-da. And I thought that was one of the funniest things I've ever seen.
I love it.
It's like so nonchalant about this horrifying stunt. What else are you going to say?
I love it.
If you ever get a chance, Freebie and the Bean, I do recommend. It was kind of a 1-2 punch with a movie called Busting that starred Elliot Gould and Robert Blake. That was also a buddy cop movie. Now, in Dirty Harry, even certain elements of Freebie and the Bean, there are certain elements of cop movies that are kind of right-leaning, almost fascist sort of things that cops do that are against the rule books. Busting is on the other side of that. Busting, they're actually trying to take down a mob boss, but they're trying to take down the cops that are with it. Like, they're breaking the rules, but they're trying to bust cop corruption. It's a lesser film, and unfortunately, to go along with the more left-leaning message, you end up with Robert Blake as a cop, and you end up with some very homophobic elements to the film. So there's just no relief. If you're going to watch a cop movie, you're going to have to take it with a grain of salt from the 70s. It's just...
That's very true.
But worthy of mention because the performances are actually good, including Robert Blake. I think if there's so many fucking movies. The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3 was a fantastic movie. Normally, this is one that I would go off on for a long time, but I think we've got to wrap it up a little bit. But I can't do a podcast about 1974 without talking about Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia.
Yeah, I was waiting for that one too, because I know you mentioned it earlier.
So yeah, unless you've got something else to end it with, let's go ahead and end on Alfredo Garcia.
Ahead. It's all yours. I have, but it's probably been 20 years, maybe like 15 years since I've seen it.
It's difficult. It's a downer. Peckinpah fascinates me, and I think he fascinates a lot of people of our generation who loved 70s. I mean, he fascinated people then too. He has such a loyal group of actors and artists that worked around him, despite the fact that Peckinpah himself was a legitimate mess. And so it's almost controversial just to invoke his name, Sam Peckinpah. Directed the Wild Bunch, The Getaway, Ride the High Country is another one that's really great. Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, especially if you can find the preview version of that rather than the studio released version that was cut by like an hour. Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia was the one that, first off, Peckinpah famously fought with every studio he ever worked with over getting the final rights to the final cut. This is the one where he was able to say in his lifetime, this came out the way he wanted it to, and the studio didn't fight him on it. Which is kind of weird because it's a flawed movie, but it's somewhat fascinatingly flawed. Peckinpah in real life was like a Nicolas Cage in Leaving Las Vegas level alcoholic.
Yeah, barely functioning. Yeah.
Barely functioning. So it's amazing that he had this kind of output in terms of his films. You hear horrible stories. When he was directing Wild Bunch, he got dysentery, but he couldn't leave the set because they were over budget and behind on time. So he would just stand there directing the movie drunk as a skunk with a pant load of shit on multiple days. He was just hard to be around. He was grumpy. He picked fights just for the sake of picking fights. And he was also very easily labeled a misogynist. I think he's more complicated than that. And you can tell by the types of movies he made, he really focuses in on like the fragility of masculinity. In Wild Bunch, they're all dealing with the fact that they still feel vital. They aren't too old to do this, but time is changing around them. Steve McQueen in The Getaway, he's happy to be out of prison, but he's also been cuckolded in the process. The fragility of his lead characters counterpoints to the misogynistic elements in the films in such a way that it makes me think that really part of why Peckinpah himself was dealing with so many demons of his own is because he really believed that men were the fragile ones and the women were the strength. And in Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, this is also displayed. Warren Oates plays the main character, Benny.
Which is I can't remember too many movies where Warren Oates was like the lead.
Very few. He had two in 74 where he was the lead. I didn't mention the other one just because it's one that actually has a reputation for being a great film, but I won't see it because it's called Cockfighter, and I won't watch something that might potentially have real cockfighting in it.
Yeah, for you.
But I love Warren Oates, and apparently he's great in that too. And Warren Oates is another one that we lost very young. No, I shouldn't say very young. I think he was in his 50s. Sam Peckinpah was in his 50s when he died too. But that's young in the grand scheme of things. Peckinpah.
Oh yeah, as somebody who's mid 40s or coming up in my mid 40s, 50s is young.
Yeah, but Peckinpah died at 59, but he looked like he was 89. He had really, really abused himself. But he was really close friends with Warren Oates, and Warren Oates was actually the genius that gave him the great advice that, hey, you want to quit alcohol like I did? Try cocaine. You'll get off alcohol, and he's super easy. Warren Oates got Sam Peckinpah hooked on coke, probably when they were making this movie together in Mexico. But Oates clearly had an adoration for Peckinpah too. His actors loved him. It's Chris Christopherson is always talking about Peckinpah, and LQ Jones always talks about Peckinpah, and these guys were very loyal to a director that I think in modern day would not be able to even get a movie shot. So he's a bit of an anomaly to command that kind of loyalty from decent men who were also, like Christopherson is very well known as a bleeding heart liberal. So it's not like he's loved for being politically off. I don't know. It's hard for me to verbalize it, but I think it's hard to talk about any Peckinpah movie entirely. But in Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, Warren Oates is basically playing Sam Peckinpah down to the point where he dressed himself like Sam Peckinpah, and then he borrowed Sam Peckinpah's sunglasses at the beginning of shooting and never gave them back. And he wears them through the entire thing. Even when his character's going to bed, he'll finally take off his sunglasses. He wears them indoors. He wears them everywhere, which is obviously some sort of a metaphor for him having a shield towards real life. Yeah. And his character is living in Mexico, playing piano at a bar for tourists I think it's in Tijuana. And he finds out that there's a bounty on the head of Alfredo Garcia put out by this big sort of, they never really tell you whether he's a crime lord or a businessman or whatever, but a big deal. His name's El Jefe. So yeah, he's a big deal in Mexico. Alfredo Garcia impregnated his young daughter out of wedlock. So he wants Alfredo Garcia dead, and he wants proof of the death brought to him in the form of Alfredo Garcia's head. Now, Benny is the character working in this bar in Mexico. He finds out about this. He's offered this by Gig Young, who we had mentioned in Blazing Saddles, was such an alcoholic that he couldn't continue with Blazing Saddles. But he was able to make it through a movie with Sam Peckinpah, obviously. But he goes on a cross-country trip with his girlfriend to find Alfredo Garcia, and he's the only one of all these people trying to go for this $1 million bounty who happens to know that Alfredo Garcia is already dead. So all these killers are going after Alfredo Garcia, and here's Benny is not a killer, taking his girlfriend, who is the former lover of Alfredo Garcia, just going to chop the head off of a corpse and collect $1 million. So he's justifying this in his mind. He's not really killing him. And if Alfredo really loved his girlfriend, then he would want her to be happy, and he would want her to have that $1 million. And all the justifications that he's going through in order to make it right that he's doing what he's doing, even though it's completely wrong. You can tell he knows that it's wrong.
He's just trying to edge.
But drawing that conclusion, drawing that to Peckinpah in real life is what's fascinating to me. He's doing something that he knows is wrong and finding every way along the way to justify it. And then this is not really a spoiler because you know that at some point they're going to find the head and that the head's going to be taken away from Benny. And Benny's going to have to fight for it. So now Benny has gone through all this shit and trying to get the head, experienced a lot of violence, lost a bit of his soul, has become a killer himself in order to defend his girlfriend. And now he's no longer interested in the money. He's interested in taking down the people who wanted the head of Alfredo Garcia for ruining his life, which is another kind of transferring the blame
yep.
onto somebody else, even though the person he's transferring the blame to is also a legitimately bad person. Yeah. So I've probably gone on too far about this movie, but if you can't tell, I love the movie because of how complicated it is and how dark it is morally and ethically, and how it kind of applies to the life of this artist who I greatly admire, and at the same time was probably a despicable human being that people around him would defend to the death. It's so contradictory.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's the thing is I think it might have been a British documentary I saw about him, like a BBC documentary, but I watched a documentary about Sam Peckinpah, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, and it was really fascinating because, you know, he had those people that were super loyal to him, but like every story about him seemed like a nightmare.
Like, why are they so loyal to this guy? But
I know. But because I think he was legitimately a genius, and they knew that working with him, he was going to make quality work. But I mean, again, though, there was this sort of weird outlaw attitude at the time, especially coming like out of the end of the 60s and the early 70s, where a lot of filmmakers were sort of seen as legitimate mavericks or legitimate outlaws. And like, I think Sam Peckinpah is probably the quintessential sort of like, fuck you, I'm doing it my way, or, you know, just didn't give a shit, but in a way that was not healthy or not necessarily something you should idealize. But I never heard the working with dysentery. At least I don't remember hearing the dysentery story. But that tells you everything you need to know. But yeah. But also War Notes never gets enough love, so I'm glad that.
War Notes is great.
Yeah, I'm glad we're ending on some Peckinpah. So that's great. 1974, man. I feel like even the lesser known films we didn't talk about, we could still talk about. Like I said, we didn't really go into Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3. Probably some other films we didn't touch upon, but again, man, 1974. What a decade for movies. I keep saying decade, but I mean 70s. But
yeah.
Anyways,
so much good stuff. We never got into The Great Gatsby with Robert Redford, and you know, there's just a lot of good stuff. Yep. So thanks for joining me on this nostalgic trip to 1974 that I'm now only remembering. When we started this 100 years ago, this was dedicated to my parents for their wedding anniversary. They were married in 1974. So happy anniversary, Mom and Dad. Thank you for joining me as always. I just love you.
Well, Devin, this is always the highlight of my week. You know, like I said, as somebody who loves cinema, like you are a wealth of information. You are a encyclopedia film. I think I feel like this has been a long time coming, and that you needed to have an outlet to really voice both your passion and knowledge of cinema and the wide breadth of cinema. One thing I've always appreciated about you specifically is that you don't love just dramas or just action movies or just horror movies. You love everything, and I think that it's always, you get me more excited about. I'm already loving movies, and every time we finish talking, I get even more excited. Now I'm just
likewise.
Now I'm always ready to see some of the stuff. But yeah, hopefully our listeners enjoy it as much as I enjoy filming it with you. So hopefully they can sit through 3+ hours of the 1974. But I think I said there's a lot to learn, a lot of laughs. So I hope they enjoyed it as much as I enjoy recording it.
All right. We'll see you guys next time we see you guys. We'll come up with something real soon. Make sure to check for us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts. We're on a lot of stuff.
We're out there. You can find us.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. Just keep in mind that Den of Sin is CIN, as in cinema, with Devin and James. So everybody be safe, and everybody keep the 70s going. Let's
there you go.
Let's get back to that style of filmmaking.
Exactly. And most importantly, happy anniversary to Devin's mom and dad.